What if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? It's a terrifying thought, one that Jake knew all too well. Sitting alone in his cramped Cleveland apartment, he stared blankly at his phone, the dull hum of the city outside barely reaching his ears. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he tried to convince himself this wasn't a ridiculous idea. The thought had come to him late the night before, when the weight of debt, eviction notices, and the silence of unanswered job applications had crushed what little hope he had left. What if I just asked Elon Musk for $1, he whispered to the empty room. The idea was simple. Jake wasn't looking for a handout, not really. $1, a symbolic gesture, a crack in the wall of despair, something to prove that even in the darkest moments, courage could take you places no one expected. He was a man who had once dreamed big. He'd been passionate about tech, innovation, and the idea that one person, with enough grit and smarts, could change the world. But life had a cruel way of twisting dreams into nightmares. The 2008 recession had wiped out his startup plans, leaving him jobless and directionless. Months of unemployment followed, each rejection email eroding his confidence. Family relationships strained under financial pressure, and even his loyal dog Mac seemed to sense the tension, often curling up beside him with a heavy sigh. Jake's sister Emily was the only bright spot. Though younger and struggling with her own challenges, she never stopped encouraging him. "You're not alone," she said one night, her voice soft but firm. "You have to keep going." But even Emily's words sometimes felt like whispers lost in a storm of self-doubt. The idea to message Elon Musk had felt like a joke at first. What could a billionaire care about a man asking for a single dollar? But the more Jake thought about it, the more that $1 came to symbolize something bigger: hope, connection, a challenge to himself to keep fighting. So, with shaky fingers, he typed, "Hey Elon, can you send me $1? Then he hit send and immediately regretted it. For hours, nothing happened. He stared at his phone, willing a reply into existence, but the screen stayed stubbornly silent. Friends and family rolled their eyes when he shared the story, calling it a waste of time. "Focus on finding a job," Marcus, his oldest friend, said. "Not chasing billionaire dreams." But Jake couldn't shake the feeling that this tiny, bold act might just be the start of something. Days passed. Then one afternoon, while sitting at a diner nursing a cold coffee, his phone buzzed. It was a notification from Twitter. He blinked, heart hammering. The message was short and enigmatic: "Why $1?" The words hit him like a lightning bolt. Elon Musk had actually seen his message. Was it a joke? A challenge? A cryptic test? Jake didn't know. But suddenly, the world felt a little less heavy, and hope flickered again. That tiny question was the spark he needed to keep going. Jake remembered the first time he heard about Elon Musk. As a kid, he was fascinated by stories of inventors and dreamers, the ones who dared to think bigger than their circumstances. Elon was a modern-day pioneer, launching rockets, revolutionizing electric cars, and dreaming of Mars. Jake envied him, but also felt a strange kinship, because despite their differences, they both knew what it meant to fail, to face setbacks, and to keep pushing forward. This response from Elon wasn't just a reply, it was a message wrapped in mystery and possibility. Jake's mind raced. Why $1? What was Elon trying to say? Was it a test of his intentions? A metaphor for something greater? The question lingered in his thoughts day and night. Over the next few days, Jake found himself revisiting Elon's tweets, interviews, and stories. He dove into articles about Tesla's early struggles, SpaceX's near bankruptcies, and Musk's relentless work ethic. He realized that behind the headlines and the public persona was a man who believed in taking risks, failing forward, and thinking big, but starting small. The $1 was like a seed, the smallest unit of value, yet capable of growing into something immense. Jake began to reflect on his own life, remembering the pride he once took in his ideas and work. He thought about the nights spent in his garage, tinkering with gadgets, dreaming of creating something meaningful. Those dreams had dimmed, but maybe, just maybe, they weren't dead. The simple act of asking for $1 was a sign that he wasn't ready to give up yet. Meanwhile, friends and family watched the saga with mixed feelings. Emily was quietly hopeful, cheering Jake on even when others doubted him. Marcus remained skeptical but couldn't help but admire Jake's determination. Jake's father, distant and gruff, never spoke about the situation, but his rare phone calls hinted at concern beneath the surface. The story of Jake's message to Elon started to spread locally, shared as a quirky anecdote on social media, a symbol of desperation and hope intertwined. For Jake, it was becoming something more, a catalyst that might change his life. Yet, the path ahead was uncertain. Elon's cryptic reply raised more questions than answers. Jake felt a mix of excitement and anxiety. What if it was a joke? What if he'd embarrassed himself? But deep down, he knew that even asking the question took bravery, the bravery to be vulnerable in a world that often rewards only certainty and success. As Jake sat that evening in his small apartment, phone in hand, he realized this was the beginning of a new chapter. The $1 wasn't about money, it was about daring to ask, daring to hope, and daring to start over. This story might just spark a new beginning, not just for Jake, but for anyone who has ever felt stuck, lost, or alone. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? He whispered to the empty room. The journey was just beginning, and Jake was ready to face whatever came next, one small step at a time. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Jake hadn't always been the man who felt crushed under the weight of the world. Once, he was full of dreams and promise, growing up in a quiet suburb outside Cleveland where life seemed straightforward and opportunities felt within reach. His childhood was simple but happy, filled with neighborhood baseball games, family dinners, and long summer evenings when the sky burned bright with stars. His parents were hardworking folks, his mom a nurse who worked double shifts and his dad a factory foreman who rarely spoke but showed love in quiet, steady ways. From an early age, Jake learned the value of hard work and responsibility, lessons that stayed with him even when life got complicated. But the foundation wasn't flawless. His father was a man of few words and high expectations. While he never raised a hand, his disappointment was palpable when Jake struggled to meet those standards. "You've got to be better than average," his father often said, more a command than encouragement. This pressure made Jake internalize failure as personal weakness, an idea that haunted him well into adulthood. Jake's sister Emily was the other anchor in his life. Soft-spoken but fiercely loyal, she was the only one who understood the battles he fought beneath his stoic exterior. Growing up, Emily looked up to her older brother as a protector and a friend, even when things between Jake and their father grew tense. She was the person Jake could always count on, the voice reminding him that he was more than his mistakes. For many years, Jake held tight to his dreams of being an entrepreneur. He wasn't interested in the typical 9-to-5 grind, he wanted to build something that mattered. Late nights spent in the garage, tinkering with gadgets, writing code, and sketching business ideas were his refuge. His passion for technology was contagious, inspiring friends and family to believe that he might just be the one to break out and succeed. But reality hit hard after college. Student loans stacked up, and job prospects dried up during a shaky economy. His startup, a local business app meant to connect small shops with customers, never took off. Investors passed him by, skeptical of his lack of experience and the crowded market. That failure wasn't just financial, it shook Jake's confidence to the core. He blamed himself, spiraled into frustration, and withdrew from those who cared about him. With no steady income, the bills piled up. He moved from apartment to cheaper apartment, each place less welcoming than the last. His relationship with his father deteriorated further, calls grew less frequent and more strained. Conversations that once held hope turned into awkward silences or sharp words. Emily tried to keep the family ties alive, but even she struggled to bridge the growing gaps. Friends like Marcus, who had been Jake's closest ally through college and beyond, offered support but eventually hit their limits. Marcus had his own life and couldn't carry the weight of Jake's failures. Their conversations often ended in frustration or silence. The man who once inspired others was now the one needing saving. Jake's mental health suffered quietly but deeply. Anxiety and depression crept into his days, making even simple tasks feel monumental. He stopped answering calls, avoided social gatherings, and spent long nights staring at the ceiling, haunted by the question of where it all went wrong. His dog Max, a golden retriever with gentle eyes, was a rare source of comfort. Max's unwavering companionship reminded Jake of loyalty and unconditional love, the kind that doesn't judge based on success or failure. But even Max couldn't shield him from the creeping sense of hopelessness. The eviction notices began arriving, each one a reminder of how close Jake was to losing everything. His landlord, initially patient, gave final warnings. The threat of homelessness loomed large. More than that, Jake feared losing Max. Without a stable home, he might not be able to keep the dog he loved like family. One evening, after a particularly crushing day, Jake sat on his worn couch, Max curled at his feet. The weight of months without progress pressed down on him, suffocating and relentless. His mind raced through memories of better times and dreams that felt forever out of reach. It was in that moment, scrolling through his phone and seeing Elon Musk's name trending for launching another rocket, that an unlikely idea took root. What if he could reach out to Elon? Not for thousands or millions, just $1. The smallest unit of currency, but also a symbol of belief and connection. The thought made him laugh bitterly at first. Who would take him seriously? But that laugh was followed by a spark of hope, fragile but persistent. Maybe asking for $1 was less about the money and more about the courage to ask for help, to believe something better was possible. That night, he drafted a message, "Hey Elon, can you send me $1? It was short, direct, and absurdly hopeful. He sent it into the void, unsure if it would ever be seen or if it even mattered. Over the next days, Jake's life continued its downward spiral. Bills went unpaid, the eviction date loomed closer, and tensions with family and friends grew. Yet, something had shifted inside him. The act of asking, even for something so small, planted a seed of resilience. He began to focus not just on what he'd lost but on what he still had, his determination, his sister's support, and his own ability to dream. Friends thought he was crazy. "You're wasting time," Marcus said more than once. "Focus on what you can control." But Jake clung to that tiny hope. The story of his message spread slowly. Some people laughed, others felt inspired. Local news picked it up as a quirky human interest story, and for the first time in a long while, Jake's phone buzzed with messages of encouragement from strangers. His sister Emily stood by him, telling him to hold on, that things might change. The tension in Jake's life was far from over. But that moment, sending the message to Elon Musk, marked a turning point. It was the first act of bravery in months, a crack in the wall of his despair. The $1 was a symbol, a challenge, a beacon. Jake wasn't just asking for money. He was asking for a sign, for permission to believe again, to try again. And little did he know, that simple message would soon lead to a response that changed everything. The reply from Elon Musk was brief but powerful: "Why $1?" That simple question ignited a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions inside Jake that he hadn't expected. It was like Elon had thrown a lifeline, not with money, but with curiosity. Jake sat on his couch, phone in hand, heart pounding as he stared at the screen. Why $1? Why had he asked for that tiny amount? The answer wasn't simple. That dollar was more than just currency. It was a symbol of hope, proof that even in the darkest times, one could dare to ask, to reach out, to believe. But now Elon's question forced Jake to dig deeper. Why was he really asking? He thought back to all the moments of despair, the eviction notices, the mounting debts, the shame of calling his sister for help. But beneath that was something else, a hunger for connection, for validation, for meaning. That's what the $1 meant. Over the next few days, Jake wrestled with how to answer Elon's message. Should he explain his story? Or keep it simple? His pride and insecurities battled inside him, each word feeling like a test. Finally, he typed a reply, because sometimes hope starts small. Because asking for help is hard, but necessary. Because $1 can remind me that someone out there sees me. He hit send, feeling a strange mixture of relief and vulnerability. That message wasn't just for Elon, it was for himself too. The days that followed were tense. Jake checked his phone obsessively, waiting for another response, unsure what to expect. Meanwhile, the pressures of his real life didn't pause. His eviction date was fast approaching, and the stress was suffocating. He spent restless nights researching shelters and low-cost housing options, trying to map out a way forward if the worst happened. Emily tried to keep him grounded. "We'll figure this out together," she said, sitting beside him in the cramped apartment. "You're not alone, Jake." But even her comforting words couldn't erase the tension between Jake and their father. When his father called, the conversation was curt and awkward, ending with a reminder that Jake needed to get his act together. It was a painful reminder of the distance that had grown between them. Meanwhile, Jake's friend Marcus started to pull away. Their weekly calls became infrequent, and when they did happen, Marcus sounded frustrated. "Jake, you need to focus on reality. This Elon thing, it's a distraction." Jake tried to explain that it was more than that, but Marcus's skepticism was unshakable. Feeling isolated but determined, Jake found himself caught in a cycle of highs and lows, the climax-hope-climax pattern that defined his recent months. One day, the hope came in the form of a small freelance gig Marcus helped him land, a chance to do some tech support for a local business. It wasn't much, but it was a start. For a brief moment, Jake felt a flicker of hope, proof that he could still provide value and rebuild. But the next day, that hope was crushed when the business delayed payment, citing cash flow problems. It felt like the universe was mocking him, and Jake's confidence took another hit. Yet, every time he fell, he found a way to get back up. Elon's question echoed in his mind, "Why $1?" It pushed him to look beyond immediate problems and to keep his focus on what mattered most, perseverance. As Jake navigated this emotional roller coaster, his story began to reach others. A local journalist picked up the tale of Jake's message to Elon, framing it as a modern-day David and Goliath story. The article went viral locally and on social media, sparking conversations about hope, desperation, and the power of asking for help. Jake was flooded with messages, some supportive, some critical, and some downright cruel. Among the encouragement, strangers shared their own stories of hardship and resilience, making Jake feel less alone in his struggles. But the attention also brought new pressures. Suddenly, Jake was the face of a story bigger than himself, expected to be a symbol of inspiration even when he felt broken inside. The mounting stress affected his relationships further. Emily tried to shield him from the worst of the public scrutiny, but Jake grew distant, afraid to show vulnerability in front of strangers. Marcus's frustration deepened, and the two friends argued over priorities and choices. One heated exchange ended with Marcus saying, "You're chasing fantasies while the real world is moving on without you." That cut deeper than Jake wanted to admit. Yet, through all the tension, Jake discovered unexpected allies. Online communities rallied around him, offering advice, resources, and emotional support. A retired engineer reached out to mentor him, sharing wisdom and encouragement. A local nonprofit offered temporary housing assistance. Slowly, Jake began piecing together a support system beyond his immediate circle. But the rising conflict wasn't just external, it was internal. Jake's pride clashed with his need for help. His past failures haunted him, and his fear of disappointing his family weighed heavily. He struggled to reconcile the man he wanted to be with the man he was becoming. One night, overwhelmed by anxiety, Jake called Emily, voice shaking. "I don't know if I can do this," he admitted. "What if I fail again?" Emily's response was steady and clear. "You're not failing. You're trying. And that's what counts." That conversation became a turning point, reminding Jake that hope wasn't about avoiding failure, but about continuing despite it. Meanwhile, Elon Musk's responses remained infrequent but impactful. Another message arrived: sometimes the smallest request shows the biggest courage. That cryptic encouragement spurred Jake forward, even when the path was dark. Yet just as hope blossomed, another challenge struck. A close family member fell ill, and Jake was forced to step up financially and emotionally, stretching his already limited resources. Balancing personal crisis with his fragile progress tested Jake's resilience like never before. The rising conflict, the push and pull of setbacks and hope, defined this chapter of Jake's life. Every small victory was shadowed by a looming challenge, but each challenge was met with renewed determination. Jake learned that life wasn't about smooth progress, but about navigating the stormy seas with grit and heart. And through it all, the question, why $1, stayed with him, not just as Elon's message, but as a mantra for courage in the face of uncertainty. The journey ahead was far from over, but Jake was no longer alone in the fight. This chapter closed with Jake standing at the edge of change, battered but unbroken, ready to take the next step into the unknown. Jake never imagined that a simple message asking for a single dollar could launch him on a journey so unpredictable and filled with new challenges. After Elon Musk's cryptic but encouraging replies, Jake found himself thrust into a whirlwind of events that took him far beyond his small apartment in Cleveland. The story that started as a desperate plea was now a beacon attracting attention, opportunity, and unexpected tests of character. It all began with a direct message from Elon's team, not Elon himself, inviting Jake to participate in a virtual Q&A session with some of Elon's closest advisors. Jake was stunned. The invitation wasn't just a polite brush-off, it was an open door. Nervous but determined, Jake spent days preparing. He reread every interview Elon had ever given, absorbed every detail about Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink. He crafted questions and rehearsed answers about his own story. When the day finally arrived, Jake logged into the video call from his tiny apartment, feeling as if the walls might cave in from excitement and anxiety. On the screen were faces he recognized from media reports, engineers, project managers, and strategists who worked alongside Elon. Their warm greetings made Jake's fear settle just enough to focus. The session was surreal. Jake shared his story, his struggles, and his hopes, speaking honestly and vulnerably. The advisors listened intently, occasionally nodding or asking thoughtful questions. Then came the unexpected. They offered Jake an internship opportunity within one of Elon's companies. It wasn't a high-paying role, nor was it a guaranteed path to success, but it was a chance, a door opened because of his courage to ask and the resilience he had shown. The offer shook Jake to his core. Months ago, he would have dismissed such a chance as impossible. Now, it felt like the breakthrough he desperately needed. But accepting meant a drastic change. He would have to relocate to California, leaving behind Emily, Marcus, and the few roots he still had. It meant stepping into a world of intense pressure, fast pace, and fierce competition, a world that intimidated and excited him all at once. He talked it over with Emily, who was both proud and worried. "This is huge, Jake. But it's going to be hard," she said. "I'll be with you every step, no matter what." Marcus was skeptical, warning Jake not to lose himself in the glamour. "Remember where you came from," Marcus said. "Don't get swallowed up." Jake appreciated the caution but knew this was a risk worth taking. He accepted the offer and prepared to leave Cleveland behind. The transition was anything but smooth. From the moment he arrived in California, Jake felt like a small fish in a vast ocean. The tech campus was intimidating, filled with brilliant minds who seemed confident and unshakable. Jake grappled with imposter syndrome, questioning whether he truly belonged. The work was demanding, long hours, complex problems, and expectations that seemed impossible. But Jake reminded himself why he was there. The memory of that $1 message kept him grounded. He focused on learning, asking questions, and contributing however he could. Along the way, he met people who became both allies and challengers. Some saw potential in him and offered guidance. Others doubted him, treating him like an outsider. Jake faced misunderstandings and conflicts, especially when deadlines clashed with his need to care for Emily, who was struggling with health issues back home. One project nearly derailed his progress when a critical mistake he made caused a delay. The pressure was immense, and Jake felt the old doubts creeping back. But instead of giving in, he owned the error, learned from it, and worked harder to fix the problem. That experience marked a turning point. He realized that failure wasn't the end but a step on the journey. Each day brought new discoveries, not only about technology but about himself. He learned to manage stress, to communicate more effectively, and to trust in his own abilities. The city itself was a challenge and a wonder. California's sunny skies and vibrant energy contrasted sharply with the gray uncertainty Jake had left behind. Yet the loneliness was real. Nights in a new place, away from family, tested his resolve. The simple rituals of his old life, the phone calls with Emily, walks with Max in the park, were now memories he cherished but couldn't replicate. Still, Jake found strength in small victories, mastering a tough coding problem, receiving praise from a team leader, and connecting with other interns who shared their own stories of struggle and hope. The internship was not just a job, it was an emotional and mental journey through highs and lows. One weekend, while walking through the Silicon Valley streets, Jake reflected on how far he'd come since that fateful message. He thought about the unexpected twists, the viral news articles, the public attention, the criticism, and the support. None of it was easy, but it had forced him to grow. His relationship with Emily remained a lifeline. Despite the distance, they talked daily. Emily's encouragement and honesty kept Jake grounded. They shared laughter, frustrations, and dreams of a future where things would be different. Marcus's words still echoed, reminding Jake to stay true to himself. He knew the path ahead was uncertain, but he was no longer paralyzed by fear. Then came the moment that tested Jake's resilience like never before. Elon Musk himself reached out with a personal message, inviting Jake to attend a special event showcasing a new SpaceX project. It was a rare opportunity, and Jake felt overwhelmed by the honor and the pressure. The event was held at the SpaceX launch facility, a sprawling complex that seemed like something out of a science fiction movie. Jake stood among engineers, scientists, and media personalities, feeling like a spectator in a world he'd only dreamed of joining. The presentation was breathtaking, cutting-edge rockets, visions of Mars colonization, and the promise of pushing humanity's boundaries. Amid the excitement, Jake was reminded of why he'd reached out in the first place. It wasn't about money or fame, it was about daring to dream, no matter the odds. After the event, Elon approached Jake briefly. Their conversation was brief but impactful. Elon praised Jake's courage and resilience and encouraged him to keep pushing forward. That moment was a surge of validation that Jake hadn't expected but desperately needed. Yet, the journey was far from over. Back in his apartment that night, Jake reflected on the magnitude of what he was experiencing. The unexpected journey had brought him face to face with his fears, hopes, and the complexity of change. It wasn't a straight line but a winding road filled with challenges and growth. The $1 message was no longer just a cry for help, it was a symbol of transformation, a reminder that even the smallest acts can ripple outward in ways we can't imagine. As Jake prepared for the next day, balancing work, family, and his own dreams, he realized that this journey was just beginning. The hardships ahead would test him further, but he felt ready. He understood now that true courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to keep moving forward despite it. Jake's journey had been marked by small victories and crushing setbacks, but nothing prepared him for the emotional storm that was about to hit. It started as a normal day at the internship, meetings, coding sessions, and the usual barrage of tasks, but by evening, everything changed. Jake received a call from Emily, her voice trembling with urgency. Their father had suffered a stroke. The news hit Jake like a physical blow. The man whose approval he had long sought, the source of both pride and pain, was suddenly fragile and vulnerable. All the tension that had simmered beneath the surface erupted into a flood of emotions: fear, guilt, regret, and a deep longing for reconciliation. Jake immediately booked a flight back to Cleveland, his mind racing with memories of childhood, of harsh words and missed chances. He sat beside his father's hospital bed, holding a hand that had once been stern but now was weak and trembling. His father's eyes flickered open, and for a moment, Jake saw a softness that he had never truly witnessed before. The hospital room became a crucible of healing and confrontation. The past grievances were too heavy to ignore, yet the proximity forced Jake to face them. His father apologized for the pressure and silence, admitting that he had struggled to express love in his own way. Jake, in turn, shared his regrets and fears, breaking down walls of pride and pain. This emotional climax was a turning point not only for their relationship but for Jake's own growth. He realized that love and forgiveness were more powerful than any external success or failure. At the same time, the family crisis complicated Jake's internship. Balancing hospital visits, family responsibilities, and the demanding workload became an exhausting juggling act. The stress tested Jake's limits, threatening to unravel the progress he had made. Yet, through this struggle, he discovered new reservoirs of strength. His colleagues showed unexpected compassion, offering flexible hours and moral support. The mentor who had guided him stepped in more frequently, helping Jake manage his tasks and emotions. The experience deepened Jake's understanding of resilience. It wasn't about going it alone but about accepting help and leaning on others when needed. Amid these personal trials, Jake's story caught the attention of Elon Musk again. Elon sent a personal message acknowledging Jake's perseverance and inviting him to contribute ideas to an upcoming project aimed at improving healthcare technology. This was a profound moment for Jake, the merging of his personal pain with a professional opportunity that could potentially impact millions. Inspired by this chance, Jake threw himself into work with renewed purpose. He brainstormed ideas for wearable devices that could monitor health signs and alert caregivers to emergencies, drawing from his recent experiences. His proposals sparked interest in the team, and he was invited to present them at a company innovation meeting. The presentation was nerve-wracking, but Jake's passion and authenticity shone through. His story resonated deeply, turning abstract technology into a mission driven by real human need. The emotional climax wasn't just about a health crisis or a career milestone, it was the moment Jake embraced his full self, the flaws, the hopes, the pain, and the strength. It was the moment he stopped chasing external validation and started finding value within. Yet, the journey was far from over. The path forward would require continued growth, sacrifice, and courage. But Jake felt ready. He had learned that the hardest battles often led to the deepest rewards. The chapter closed with Jake standing at a crossroads, feeling the weight of the past and the promise of the future. The $1 message that started it all had transformed into a symbol of hope, resilience, and the power of human connection. After the emotional storm of the previous weeks, Jake felt a shift within himself, a subtle but profound change that was as much internal as external. The journey he had embarked on, starting with a simple message asking Elon Musk for $1, had evolved into a story about more than just money or fame. It was about love, sacrifice, forgiveness, and the resilience of the human spirit. Back in Cleveland, Jake's father was slowly recovering. The stroke left lingering challenges, but the fragile truce between them held firm. They found moments of quiet understanding, where words were not necessary, and healing happened in shared silences. Jake spent his days balancing his internship responsibilities with caregiving duties, an exhausting but meaningful rhythm. Emily remained his unwavering anchor. She moved to California to support him fully, her presence a steady reminder that he was not alone in this journey. Their relationship deepened, rooted in honesty and mutual support. Reflecting on the past months, Jake realized how much he had grown. He was no longer the man who felt invisible and powerless. He had faced rejection, public scrutiny, personal loss, and self-doubt, and survived. More than surviving, he had learned to thrive by embracing vulnerability and seeking connection rather than running from it. The experience with Elon Musk and his team had opened doors, but Jake knew that real success wasn't defined by wealth or titles. It was measured in the relationships he nurtured and the purpose he found in his work. His idea for healthcare technology had gained traction. The wearable device concept was being developed by the company, a project born from his pain and hope. It was a reminder that sometimes the darkest moments could inspire the brightest innovations. Jake also reconnected with Marcus, their friendship weathered but intact. They had honest conversations about mistakes and growth, realizing that true friendship could survive conflict and distance. Jake's story continued to inspire people beyond his immediate circle. The viral article led to invitations to speak at local schools and community groups, where he shared his message: asking for help is not weakness, and small acts of courage can ripple into profound change. Looking back, Jake understood why he had asked for just $1. It wasn't about the money, it was about the symbolism. The dollar represented hope, a foothold in a life that felt like it was slipping away. It was a reminder that sometimes the smallest requests require the greatest courage. As Jake stood on the cusp of a new chapter, he felt gratitude for the hardships that shaped him and the people who stood by him. The journey was far from over, but he faced the future with a newfound strength. The story that began with a desperate plea had become a testament to the power of love, resilience, and human connection. In the end, Jake learned that life is unpredictable and often challenging, but with courage and support, love will always lead the way. Jake's life was beginning to feel like a new chapter written with both hope and uncertainty. After months of turmoil, progress, and deep reflection, he was stepping into a phase where opportunity and responsibility converged. The healthcare tech project inspired by his personal experiences had grown from a simple idea into a collaborative effort involving engineers, designers, and medical professionals. Jake found himself in the middle of something bigger than he had ever imagined. But with this growth came new pressures. The expectations were high, and Jake grappled with the reality that innovation was a marathon, not a sprint. Every small success was matched by a new problem to solve. One of the biggest challenges was navigating the corporate culture of Elon Musk's company. The environment was intense, demanding, and sometimes unforgiving. Jake often found himself working late nights, trying to balance technical work with meetings and presentations. The weight of responsibility felt heavy, especially knowing that the device they were building could save lives. Alongside the work stress, Jake's personal life faced its own hurdles. Emily's health had been wavering, and supporting her required emotional strength and practical adjustments. She encouraged Jake to keep pursuing his dreams, but he could see the toll the uncertainty was taking on her. Jake also found himself confronted with the reality of old relationships that hadn't fully healed. His father's recovery was slow, and the emotional scars from years of silence still lingered beneath the surface. Family visits were filled with moments of tenderness but also tension, as unspoken pain occasionally bubbled up. Through it all, Jake reminded himself of the lessons he had learned. Resilience was about facing difficulties head-on, but also knowing when to ask for help. He leaned on his new support network at work and within the online communities that had sustained him from the beginning. The pressure sometimes made Jake question whether he was ready for all of this. He felt like an imposter at times, worried he might lose everything he had worked for. But every time doubt crept in, he remembered Elon's message: sometimes the smallest request shows the biggest courage. That message was his anchor. Jake began to realize that his journey was not just about professional success or personal healing, it was about redefining what success meant to him. It wasn't just the technology they were building, but the impact it could have on people's lives. He envisioned a future where healthcare was accessible, compassionate, and driven by real human needs. As the project progressed, Jake took on a mentorship role for new interns, sharing his story openly. He encouraged them to embrace vulnerability and to understand that failure was part of growth. This gave him a sense of purpose beyond the work itself. One evening, after a long day of coding and meetings, Jake received a surprise visit from Marcus. The two friends sat on the balcony, watching the California sunset, reflecting on how far they'd come. Marcus apologized for his earlier skepticism and expressed pride in Jake's growth. They talked about dreams, fears, and the uncertain future ahead. That conversation rekindled a friendship that had been strained but was now stronger and more honest. Meanwhile, Jake continued to share his story publicly, participating in podcasts, webinars, and community talks. The message that asking for help was a strength resonated with many, inspiring others to reach out in their own lives. Yet, Jake also learned the importance of boundaries, protecting his mental health amid public attention. He set limits on how much he shared, focusing on what felt authentic and manageable. The unexpected journey that began with a simple $1 request had led Jake to places he never imagined, both beautiful and challenging. Each day was a mix of progress and setbacks, joy and struggle. But Jake no longer feared the unknown. He had learned that the path to healing and success was not linear but full of twists, turns, and surprises. As this chapter closed, Jake stood at a crossroads, looking ahead with cautious optimism. The future was uncertain, but he was ready to face it with courage, hope, and the lessons of his past guiding him forward. Despite the progress Jake had made, a heavy cloud of doubt began to settle over him. The intense pressure from work, the ongoing struggles with family, and the uncertainty surrounding Emily's health compounded into a sense of overwhelm he hadn't felt before. One particularly grueling week, Jake found himself questioning everything, his capabilities, his choices, even the very idea that had brought him here. He lay awake in his apartment late at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying moments of failure and criticism. The fear of letting down those who believed in him gnawed at his mind. He felt isolated despite the bustling world around him, the virtual meetings, and the constant chatter of notifications. This was his lowest point yet, a moment where the weight of expectations almost crushed his spirit. But just when the darkness threatened to consume him, Jake reached out. It was a small step but a crucial one. He called Emily and spoke honestly about his fears and doubts. Her voice was steady and reassuring, reminding him of the strength they shared and the progress he had made. She encouraged him to seek professional support, and together they found a therapist who specialized in working with people in high-pressure environments. Therapy became a lifeline for Jake, a space where he could unpack the emotional baggage he'd been carrying for years. He learned strategies to manage stress, to separate his worth from his work, and to build resilience not just in action but in mindset. Around the same time, Jake's colleagues noticed a change in his demeanor. They stepped up, offering help with deadlines and sharing stories of their own struggles. The community he had found at work became a real support network. One senior engineer, Linda, took Jake under her wing, sharing wisdom from her decades of experience and encouraging him to trust in his instincts. Their mentorship sessions were not just about technology but about life, balancing ambition with self-care, and learning to ask for help without shame. Jake also reconnected with Marcus more frequently. Marcus's grounded perspective and dry humor provided a comforting balance to Jake's intense focus. Together, they started weekend hikes in the nearby hills, a way to clear their minds and reconnect with simpler pleasures. These outings became essential to Jake's mental health, reminding him that life was bigger than work or worry. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. Jake found renewed energy and clarity, fueled by the knowledge that vulnerability was not weakness but a bridge to connection and healing. He realized that asking for $1 from Elon Musk had been a spark, but the real journey was about embracing humanity in all its complexity. The healthcare device project also took a significant step forward. After months of iterations and testing, the prototype was ready for clinical trials. Jake was deeply involved in coordinating with medical professionals and ensuring the technology met real patient needs. The stakes felt higher than ever, but Jake's confidence had grown. He approached challenges with a balance of humility and determination. As clinical trials commenced, Jake was invited to present their progress at a major tech conference. Standing on the stage, sharing the story behind the project, from a desperate message to a life-changing innovation, Jake felt a wave of emotion. The audience's reaction was overwhelming, many moved by his honesty and vision. This public recognition was validating, but Jake also reminded himself that the work was far from done. Behind the scenes, obstacles persisted. Funding challenges, technical glitches, and regulatory hurdles tested the team's resolve. Jake learned to navigate these with patience and flexibility, understanding that setbacks were part of innovation. By the end of the chapter, Jake had emerged stronger and more grounded. The moment of doubt had become a catalyst for growth, reminding him that even in the darkest times, support and self-compassion could light the way. He was ready to face whatever came next, carrying the lessons of resilience, community, and hope into the future. Just when Jake thought he had settled into a rhythm, life threw another curveball his way. The healthcare project was gaining attention, and with it came unexpected opportunities, but also difficult truths. One afternoon, Jake received an email from a prominent venture capital firm interested in investing in the wearable device. The news was thrilling. This could mean the resources needed to take the project from prototype to mass production. Yet the excitement was quickly tempered by the reality of negotiations. The investors wanted control and decision-making power, pushing for changes that didn't align with Jake's vision. The idea that had started as a deeply personal mission was at risk of becoming just another commercial product. This conflict weighed heavily on Jake. He spent long nights debating with the project team, trying to balance the need for funding with maintaining the integrity of the device's purpose. His mentor, Linda, warned him that these were common challenges in startups but also advised him to stand firm on core values. At the same time, Jake's personal life demanded his attention. Emily's condition had worsened slightly, requiring more care and frequent hospital visits. The emotional toll was exhausting, yet Jake refused to let it derail him. He was determined to succeed not just for himself but for her and the countless patients who could benefit from their work. The strain revealed cracks in their relationship, though. Arguments erupted over priorities and stress, and both struggled to communicate their fears. It was a difficult period of growth and adjustment, but they ultimately reaffirmed their commitment to each other. Meanwhile, Jake's father had taken a turn for the worse. The fragile peace they had built was shattered by the reality of mortality. Sitting by his father's bedside, Jake confronted the painful truth that some wounds could never fully heal. Yet, in those final moments, there was grace, a reconciliation born not of words but of presence and forgiveness. The experience deepened Jake's understanding of sacrifice and love. He realized that while ambition and innovation drove him forward, it was the human connections that grounded him. Professionally, the project faced technical setbacks. A key component in the device's sensor system failed during initial testing, threatening to delay the timeline. The team scrambled to troubleshoot, but the pressure was immense. Jake felt the weight of responsibility acutely, knowing that every delay could cost lives waiting for the technology. Despite the challenges, Jake found moments of unexpected joy. The startup community rallied around the project, offering advice, resources, and encouragement. New friendships blossomed, reminding Jake that he wasn't alone. He also found solace in simple routines, morning runs, late-night talks with Emily, and quiet reflections on the balcony. Through all this, Jake's public presence grew. Media outlets picked up his story, portraying him as a symbol of hope and innovation. The attention was sometimes overwhelming but also opened doors for advocacy and collaboration. He spoke candidly about mental health, resilience, and the importance of human-centered technology. The chapter ended with Jake at a crossroads once again. The venture capital deal still hung in the balance, and the personal challenges loomed large. But Jake was more determined than ever to navigate the complexities with integrity, balancing ambition with empathy. The journey continued, marked by unexpected opportunities and hard truths, but fueled by the lessons of courage and connection. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The months following the venture capital offer marked a critical turning point in Jake's journey. The decision he faced was more than a business choice, it was a test of his values, priorities, and vision for the future. The investor's proposal promised significant funding, the kind that could accelerate production and marketing, but at a cost. They wanted to steer the project's direction toward maximizing profits, potentially sacrificing the original mission to help patients in need. Jake felt the weight of the responsibility bearing down on him. Accepting the deal could mean rapid growth and stability, but losing control over the project's purpose. Rejecting it might preserve the vision but risk stalling progress. The internal conflict was exhausting. In long meetings with his team, Jake expressed his concerns, advocating for a balance between innovation and ethics. The conversations were tense, with some members eager to embrace the funding and others sharing his hesitations. After much deliberation, Jake made a bold choice: he would turn down the initial offer. Instead, he pursued alternative funding sources aligned with their mission, grants from healthcare nonprofits, angel investors passionate about social impact, and crowdfunding campaigns. This decision slowed the project's pace but reinforced its core values. Around the same time, Jake's personal life reached another milestone. Emily's health stabilized enough for them to move into a new apartment together, a small sanctuary where they could build a life apart from hospital walls and constant stress. This space became a source of comfort and hope, filled with shared dreams and quiet moments. Yet, the journey was far from easy. Jake still grappled with doubts and exhaustion, especially as he juggled caregiving responsibilities and the demands of his growing role as project lead. The balance between personal and professional life was precarious, and sometimes it felt like one would have to give way for the other. But Jake had learned the importance of boundaries. He carved out time for self-care, meditation, and regular check-ins with his therapist. These practices helped him stay grounded amidst the chaos. On the professional front, the team made significant breakthroughs. The device's sensor technology improved dramatically, increasing accuracy and reliability. Clinical trials showed promising results, and patient feedback was overwhelmingly positive. The sense of progress fueled Jake's determination. With the new funding model, the project emphasized community involvement. Jake spearheaded workshops and focus groups with patients and healthcare providers, ensuring the device met real-world needs. This collaborative approach deepened the project's impact and strengthened Jake's conviction in their mission. Public interest continued to grow. Jake was invited to speak at a national healthcare innovation conference, where he shared the story behind the device, how a desperate $1 request led to a movement aimed at transforming healthcare. His message of resilience, hope, and human-centered design resonated deeply with the audience. The chapter's emotional climax came when Jake received a heartfelt letter from a patient who had benefited from the device. The message spoke of renewed independence and peace of mind, a reminder of why Jake had started this journey. In the quiet moments that followed, Jake reflected on how far he had come, from feeling invisible and desperate to becoming a catalyst for change. The turning point wasn't just about a business decision or a breakthrough in technology, it was about embracing authenticity, staying true to one's values, and finding strength in vulnerability. As this chapter closed, Jake stood poised on the edge of a new era. The challenges ahead remained daunting, but with purpose, community, and love, he was ready to face whatever came next. With the healthcare device gaining traction and the mission more defined, Jake found himself thrust into the spotlight in ways he had never anticipated. Media interviews, conference panels, and social media engagement became regular parts of his life. At first, the attention was exhilarating, a validation of all the hard work and sacrifice. But as the public eye focused more intently on him, Jake realized how unprepared he was for the scrutiny and pressure that came with fame. The narrative spun around him wasn't always accurate or kind. Some outlets sensationalized the story, reducing it to the sensational headline, "Man who asked Elon Musk for $1 becomes tech innovator." While this drew attention, it also overlooked the complexity of Jake's journey, the setbacks, the personal struggles, and the ongoing work behind the scenes. Jake grappled with feelings of imposter syndrome despite public accolades. Each interview required a balance between vulnerability and professionalism, sharing enough to inspire without exposing himself to harsh judgment. Social media was a double-edged sword. Messages of encouragement poured in from around the world, but so did criticism and negativity. Trolls questioned his motives, mocked his background, and sometimes attacked Emily or his family. These moments tested Jake's resolve and emotional resilience. To cope, Jake developed a strategy. He limited his time online and focused on meaningful interactions. He surrounded himself with trusted friends, mentors, and a support team that helped manage his public presence. Emily's unwavering support was crucial. She reminded him to prioritize his mental health and to remember the deeper purpose behind the spotlight. Jake also used his platform to advocate for issues close to his heart: mental health awareness, accessibility in healthcare, and the importance of compassion in technology. He spoke openly about the challenges he faced, hoping to destigmatize vulnerability and encourage others to seek help. At work, Jake found the balance between public engagements and project responsibilities increasingly challenging. Delegating tasks became essential, and he worked closely with team leaders to ensure progress continued smoothly. The clinical trials advanced, and the device was nearing regulatory approval, marking a major milestone. One particularly memorable moment was a televised interview where Jake shared the story behind his famous $1 request. When asked what he would say to young people facing hardship, Jake's response was heartfelt: "It's okay to ask for help. Sometimes the smallest step opens the biggest door." This resonated widely and sparked conversations across communities. Behind the scenes, however, Jake continued to face personal struggles. Emily's health fluctuated, and Jake juggled hospital visits with the demands of public life. The strain was immense, but they leaned on each other, finding strength in their shared commitment. Jake also revisited his relationship with his father, seeking peace in the remaining time they had together. Through candid conversations and moments of forgiveness, Jake found a deeper understanding of families' complex bonds. The chapter's emotional high came during a public fundraiser event, where Jake spoke to a packed audience about hope, resilience, and the power of community. The standing ovation felt like a collective acknowledgement, not just of Jake's journey, but of everyone who had supported him. As the chapter closed, Jake reflected on the paradox of fame. It brought opportunity and influence, but also vulnerability and challenge. Yet, he knew that the real work, the lives touched, the breakthroughs made, were what truly mattered. With a steady heart and unwavering purpose, Jake was ready to face the next chapter of his journey, carrying the lessons of courage, love, and authenticity into the future. Just as momentum seemed unstoppable, Jake faced an unexpected setback that threatened to unravel months of progress. The healthcare device, which had been receiving glowing feedback during clinical trials, suddenly encountered a significant technical failure. A core sensor began producing inconsistent data, jeopardizing the reliability that was critical for patient safety. The discovery came during a routine quality assurance test, sending ripples of concern through the entire team. Jake felt the familiar pang of anxiety creeping in. After all the hard work, the countless hours, and the personal sacrifices, the project now faced a major hurdle that could delay regulatory approval and damage credibility. Meetings were called urgently. Engineers and medical advisors collaborated to identify the root cause, but the problem was complex. Initial fixes only provided temporary relief, and morale dipped as the issue persisted. Jake struggled with self-doubt, wondering if he had pushed the team too hard or overlooked critical details. His internal dialogue was harsh and unforgiving, but he reminded himself of lessons learned: setbacks are part of growth, and perseverance is key. To bolster the team's spirit, Jake organized an off-site retreat, a chance to regroup, refocus, and reconnect with the mission. The change of scenery and open conversations helped reignite their collective passion. They brainstormed innovative solutions, dividing tasks strategically and encouraging transparency. Slowly, progress was made. A breakthrough came when a junior engineer identified a flaw in the manufacturing process affecting the sensor's calibration. This discovery set off a chain reaction of improvements that stabilized the device's performance. The experience reinforced the importance of collaboration and humility. Jake openly acknowledged the setback in public updates, sharing the team's commitment to quality and safety. The honesty was met with respect and renewed trust from investors, partners, and potential users. Meanwhile, the personal challenges persisted. Emily's condition required a new treatment plan that was physically and emotionally taxing. Jake was there for every step, but the exhaustion was palpable. Balancing care responsibilities with leadership demands tested his limits. In the quiet moments, Jake reflected on the fragility of life and the preciousness of each day. The support of friends, family, and the growing community around the project became more vital than ever. Despite the setback, Jake found hope in small victories. The smile of a patient using the device successfully, the camaraderie of a team united by purpose, the quiet encouragement of Emily's presence. The chapter closed with Jake embracing resilience not just as a concept but as a daily practice. The path forward was still challenging, but he was ready to meet it head-on, armed with determination, honesty, and unwavering belief in the mission. After months of refining, repairing, and reimagining, the device was finally back on track. The sensor issues had been resolved, the quality control process had been restructured, and the clinical trials resumed with renewed confidence. The data started to pour in, and it was better than anyone could have predicted. The wearable health device was not only reliable but more intuitive and adaptable than competing models. Doctors praised its user-friendly interface and real-time responsiveness. Patients felt safer, more in control of their health, and most importantly, heard. Jake watched it all unfold with a sense of cautious optimism. He had been burned by hope before, but this time felt different. The product wasn't just functioning, it was working in real lives, in real time. Testimonials came in, an elderly man who had avoided a second stroke because the device alerted his caregiver at just the right moment, a young mother with epilepsy who now had the peace of mind to walk her daughter to school, a nurse who said it had revolutionized patient monitoring at her understaffed clinic. Every story strengthened Jake's sense of purpose. He began thinking about the future, what came next, not just for the device, but for himself, his team, and the broader mission they had stumbled into. He didn't want this to be a one-hit wonder. He envisioned a platform, an ecosystem of smart health tools powered by compassion and designed with empathy. But even as he dreamed big, Jake stayed grounded. The lessons of the past year were etched into his bones. He knew what it felt like to be desperate, to be dismissed, to feel invisible. He wanted to build a company culture where no one felt like that. So he did something unconventional. Jake made it a point to personally call every member of the team, engineers, marketers, customer support, even the interns, to thank them. One by one, he told them what their work had meant, not just for the company, but for the people whose lives they'd helped change. The calls took weeks, but he didn't mind. It reminded him of the importance of human connection, the very principle the project had been founded on. The media came knocking again, eager for another headline. But this time, Jake was more selective. He gave fewer interviews, focused on platforms that allowed for meaningful conversation rather than clickbait. He wanted to use his visibility wisely, to advocate for healthcare access, for ethical tech, for funding programs that empowered people like his younger self. One day, he received a message from an educator at a community college back in Ohio. The students had followed Jake's journey from the beginning, and the professor asked if he would speak at graduation. Jake hesitated. Public speaking was never his goal. But the thought of standing before young adults who might be struggling, who might feel just as lost as he once had, that was something he couldn't say no to. The speech took him weeks to write. He didn't want it to be about him. He wanted it to be about possibility, perseverance, and the power of starting small. He opened with the line, I once asked a billionaire for $1. Not because I needed the money, but because I needed a reason to believe that I mattered. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. Jake spoke about his failures more than his successes. About nights spent wondering if he had made a mistake, days when it seemed easier to quit. He spoke of Emily's courage, of his father's silence and eventual forgiveness, of friends who came back when it counted. He ended with a challenge: what's your $1? What's that small, scary thing you're willing to do to change your life, or someone else's? The ovation lasted for minutes. Jake returned to California with a renewed sense of purpose. He wasn't just building a company, he was helping build a generation that saw vulnerability not as a weakness, but as a door to connection. Back at the office, the team prepared for the official product launch. There were final meetings with regulators, promotional materials to be reviewed, a supply chain to monitor. But for once, Jake didn't feel overwhelmed by the to-do list. He felt present. Energized. Ready. That night, Emily cooked a simple dinner, spaghetti and garlic bread, and they sat on the floor of their tiny apartment, too tired to use the table. She looked at him with tired eyes but a glowing smile and said, "You know, we're really doing this." Jake nodded. "Yeah. We are." Then came the moment he hadn't expected: not now, not yet. Emily reached into her sweater pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Jake blinked, unsure if this was a joke. "Don't look so surprised," she laughed softly. "I've waited long enough." Inside was a ring, simple, silver, with a small engraving, "Keep going." Jake didn't cry. Not yet. But his voice cracked as he whispered, "Yes." The chapter ended not with a product launch or a media event, but with two people holding each other on the floor of a small apartment, pasta forgotten on their plates, lives forever changed, not by $1, not by a device, but by every impossible step they had taken together to get to this moment. The morning of the product launch arrived with a rare sense of calm. No blaring alarms, no late-night bug fixes, no emergency calls. Just sunlight pouring in through the blinds and the quiet certainty that after more than a year of struggle, the moment had come. Jake rose early, not because of nerves but because his body had grown used to early hours. He made coffee in silence, staring out the window at the city that had become his unlikely second home. Beside him, Emily slept peacefully, her breathing steady, a sight that grounded him more than any motivational quote or therapy session ever could. The launch was set to go live at noon. A mix of live streams, pre-recorded demos, testimonials, and a press Q&A would run concurrently, followed by limited in-store availability for the first round of production units. It wasn't just a medical device, it was being positioned as a movement. A symbol. Jake had insisted on that. The core message? Technology with heart. As the hour approached, the office buzzed like a beehive. Team members poured in early, some dressed in company-branded hoodies, others in sleek business attire. Cameras were being checked, presentations queued up, wires taped to the floors, coffee brewed in industrial quantities. Linda, the senior engineer who had become a second mentor to Jake, pulled him aside. "You ready for this?" she asked. Jake nodded. "More than I thought I'd be." She grinned. "Remember, it's not about impressing investors or headlines. It's about the people who are waiting for this to work." That reminder settled Jake's racing thoughts. At exactly noon, the countdown ended and the live stream kicked off. The host, a healthcare journalist with a reputation for cutting through hype, opened with a few remarks, then introduced Jake. Standing on stage, Jake didn't feel like a CEO or a tech star. He felt like a kid from Cleveland who'd refused to give up. He took a breath and launched into the story, not from the middle but from the beginning. "I asked Elon Musk for $1. That wasn't a joke or a stunt. I was broke. My father had just had a stroke. My partner was battling chronic illness. I had nothing but an idea, and I didn't even know if it was worth anything." He paused to let the silence sink in. I didn't get the dollar. But I got something better, a conversation. A chance. A door cracked open. And I walked through. Jake then walked the audience through the journey, the early prototypes, the team's near collapse during the sensor failure, the public skepticism, the personal pain, and finally the breakthroughs. He didn't gloss over anything. And that raw honesty became the most powerful part of the launch. What followed was a perfectly orchestrated demo showing how the wearable monitored heart rate variability, oxygen levels, seizure indicators, and fall detection, all while syncing seamlessly with care providers and family members in real time. The testimonials played on the big screen: a boy with a rare neurological condition, an elderly woman with early-stage dementia, a military veteran coping with PTSD. Each voice lent weight to the mission. Every story struck a chord. Orders began to pour in almost instantly. The servers, thankfully reinforced, held up under the demand. In the control room, cheers erupted as real-time numbers updated on the dashboard. Hospitals, clinics, and individuals from around the world were signing up. Jake didn't feel pride in the way he expected. It wasn't ego or even relief. It was something quieter, like a long-held breath finally exhaled. When the live stream ended, the office burst into applause. Hugs, high fives, and a few teary moments followed. Someone popped champagne. Others just stood there, stunned, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. Jake stepped outside for air. He wasn't alone for long. Emily joined him, dressed simply but glowing. "You did it," she said. "We did," he corrected. She smiled, then held out her hand. In her palm was a single crumpled dollar bill. "For good luck," she teased. Jake laughed, truly and freely, for the first time in weeks. The symbolic full circle wasn't lost on him. That $1, so small, so innocent, had somehow sparked a revolution. And now, it sat in his hands, soft and worn, but more powerful than any $1 million check. That night, a modest celebration took place in the office. No red carpets or influencers. Just the team, their families, and the people whose lives had touched the project. One older woman, whose adult son had suffered from seizures for years, pulled Jake aside and gripped his hand. "You gave me peace of mind," she said. "That's something I haven't had in a decade." Jake felt his throat tighten. He couldn't find the words, but she didn't need them. She squeezed his hand again and simply said, "Thank you." As the night wound down, Jake slipped away to the empty production floor. The lights were low, the hum of machines quieted for the day. He stood among the first packaged units of the device, each box sealed and labeled, ready for shipment. This room, once filled with doubt and questions, now pulsed with quiet confidence. He sat on a stool, pulled out his phone, and began writing. Not a press release, not an email, just a note to himself. He titled it, "What Comes After the Win." In it, he reminded himself that success wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that demanded even more courage, responsibility, and humility. That a product wasn't the same as a promise kept. That every life the device touched came with its own story, and every one of those stories mattered more than profits or press. He ended the note with a line that had become his mantra: "Keep going. No matter what. Just keep going." As he walked back to the main room, the team had begun cleaning up. Leftover cake, empty cups, tired but smiling faces. He joined them, not as a leader, but as a teammate. Just another person trying to do some good in the world. The launch was over. The real work was just beginning. 2 weeks after the launch, the company's inbox was overflowing. Orders, media requests, partnership proposals, and most unexpectedly, acquisition offers. Big ones. Tech conglomerates, healthcare giants, and private equity firms all saw what Jake and his team had built and wanted a piece of it. Some of the offers were astronomical. Numbers Jake had only ever seen in headlines about IPOs and unicorn startups now appeared in his inbox, attached to formal letters and embossed logos. It was flattering, surreal even. But with each new proposal, the pressure mounted. The board of advisors, newly assembled post-launch to help manage growth, urged him to consider the possibilities. Selling now could guarantee expansion. It would mean global distribution, large-scale manufacturing, research teams 10 times their current size. With the backing of a corporate partner, the device could reach millions faster. "You've done the impossible," one advisor told Jake. "Now let the pros take it from here." But something about that phrase, "take it from here," didn't sit right with Jake. He hadn't come this far to hand the steering wheel over to someone who hadn't been in the trenches, who hadn't lived through the sleepless nights and devastating setbacks. And what about the mission? Would an acquisition dilute their purpose? Would shareholders prioritize margins over patience? Jake knew those weren't just philosophical questions. They were operational realities. He brought it to his team. For once, there was no clear consensus. Some were in favor, understandably tired, tempted by life-changing payouts and the idea of stepping off the hamster wheel. Others were more cautious, worried about losing control and watching their work turned into just another product on a shelf. Jake spoke to mentors, Linda, Marcus, even his old college professor. Each offered a different perspective. Linda reminded him that growth sometimes meant letting go. Marcus asked him a question that lingered for days: would you be okay if this thing kept going but lost its soul? In the middle of this chaos, Jake had another source of clarity, Emily. Sitting across from him one night, a cup of tea between them, she asked, "What does success look like to you?" He didn't answer right away. The question wasn't about money or headlines. It was about legacy, about peace, about purpose. Jake took a long walk that night, looping through the city streets, past the same bus stop where he once sat, alone and scared, wondering if he'd made a mistake asking Elon Musk for $1. He remembered how small he felt then, how lost. And now? Now he was at a fork in the road, not because of failure but because of abundance. That was a different kind of test. Back in the office the next morning, Jake made his decision. He called a full team meeting and stood at the front of the conference room, tired but resolute. "We're not selling," he said simply. The room went quiet. "Not yet, anyway," he added with a faint smile. "We're going to scale on our own terms. We're going to find impact-aligned partners. We're going to grow slow if we have to, but we're going to grow with heart." The reaction was mixed: relief, pride, a touch of disbelief. But no one walked out. They had been through worse. And they believed in what they were building. The decision rippled through the startup world. Industry insiders called it unconventional. Some labeled it naive. Others called it brave. Jake didn't care. He knew who he was building for. Not for stockholders or headlines, but for every person who had ever needed a lifeline and didn't know where to turn. The following weeks were intense. Jake and his leadership team worked around the clock to secure values-aligned funding, expand partnerships with non-profit hospitals, and launch educational campaigns about wearable health technology. They started visiting underserved communities, offering free installations and training sessions, listening to the real needs of real people. Jake also invested in his team. He created new roles for people who had stepped up during the toughest times, offered generous mental health resources, and gave sabbaticals to those who needed rest. He knew burnout was the silent killer of missions like theirs. At home, life with Emily became more stable. Her treatment was working better than expected, and the two of them fell into a rhythm: mornings reading together, shared meals in the evenings, slow weekends without screens. Jake began to write again, short essays, journal entries, letters to his younger self. Words that reminded him of who he was before all of this. One weekend, while hiking one of their favorite trails, Emily stopped at a cliffside view and said, "I hope you know, none of this would have happened without that moment you decided to try, even when it didn't make sense. Jake nodded. He had thought about that message to Elon Musk 1,000 times. How desperate he was. How strange it had felt to even type the words. But now, standing on the other side of so many unknowns, he realized that what mattered most wasn't the message, or even the response. It was the act of reaching out. The belief that someone might listen. The choice to try when everything said not to. That's what started it all. And that's what would carry them forward. The chapter ended with Jake back at his desk late at night, reviewing an email from a rural doctor in Montana who had used their device to save a patient's life. The doctor's closing words. "Thank you for building something that actually sees people." Jake stared at the screen, then opened the old crumpled dollar Emily had given him. He pressed it flat on his desk and smiled. The real wealth, he realized, had nothing to do with numbers. It was in being seen. In seeing others. And in never letting go of the reason you started. It began with a notification Jake nearly missed. His inbox, overwhelmed with updates and inquiries, blinked a simple subject line, a note from someone you inspired. The sender was unfamiliar. No press affiliation, no corporate logo. Just a name, Tobias Warren, and a short message preview: "You probably don't remember me, but I remember you." Jake clicked. The message wasn't long, but it stopped him in his tracks. Tobias explained that he had seen the original story months ago, the tweet to Elon, the interviews, the launch. But what caught his attention most wasn't the success. It was the beginning. He had been in a dark place himself, dealing with unemployment, estrangement from his family, and a recent bipolar diagnosis. "I wasn't looking for tech," he wrote. "I was looking for proof that someone like me could still matter." He had been on the verge of giving up. But Jake's story, messy, raw, unfinished, had given him a reason to hold on. "You didn't fix me," Tobias added. "But you helped me believe that fixing was possible." Jake read the message twice, then a third time. He felt something shift inside, a mix of gratitude, humility, and something harder to name. Tobias's words echoed louder than any award or milestone ever had. Because this was what he had hoped for all along. Not just impact in data or demos, but in lives. In individuals. He sat with the letter for a long while. The office buzzed around him, but he tuned it out. The screen glowed in the darkened corner of the room, illuminating a truth he couldn't ignore: the ripple effect of doing something brave never really ends. Jake replied to Tobias. Not with platitudes, but with honesty. He thanked him for his courage and told him that he'd made his day. Then he did something unusual: he invited Tobias to visit the office, no cameras, no press. Just a conversation. 2 weeks later, Tobias arrived in person. He was quiet, observant, but clearly overwhelmed. Jake gave him a tour, introduced him to the team, and showed him the production floor. Then, they sat together in the break room with 2 coffees and no agenda. Tobias shared more of his story, about feeling lost in a system that didn't see him, about creative dreams abandoned, about a mother he hadn't spoken to in 6 years. Jake didn't interrupt. He listened, nodding, present in a way that made Tobias tear up. "You're not the guy I thought you'd be," Tobias said, laughing through tears. "You're just human." "That's the best thing I could be," Jake said. They talked for hours. Before Tobias left, Jake handed him something small, a limited edition version of the device, customized with his name and the phrase, "Keep going," etched on the back. "Because you did," Jake said. "And you still are." The encounter with Tobias left Jake changed. It reminded him that the ripple was real. That behind every user, every statistic, there was a beating heart, a fragile story. The team began integrating more feedback loops into their product development, not just technical but emotional. They invited users to submit their stories, their struggles, their victories. And Jake made it a point to read at least one every day. These stories became the compass by which the company steered its growth. Not marketing strategies or quarterly goals, but real lives touched. One evening, Jake sat alone in the quiet office, scrolling through a new submission. A young nurse in Alaska had used the device to help manage patients in remote villages with no stable internet. Another came from a teenager who felt more in control of his anxiety because of the breathing alerts the device provided. Jake saved each message, creating a private archive called the Reason Files. On tough days, he'd open a random one and read. The stories grounded him. They reminded him of the stakes. Meanwhile, the company continued to grow, new hires, new offices, more languages, more countries. But Jake resisted the urge to move too fast. He declined another acquisition offer, instead opting for a partnership with a global nonprofit that helped distribute medical technology to underdeveloped regions. It wasn't the most lucrative deal, but it was the most aligned. Emily, too, found her own new rhythm. She had become a quiet ambassador for the company, speaking to patient advocacy groups, mentoring young women entering STEM fields, and even starting a blog about navigating illness with grace and grit. One night, as they cooked dinner together, she said, "You know, you didn't just change your life. You changed mine." Jake looked up from the stove. "We changed each other's." That night, they danced in the kitchen to an old song from their college days, surrounded by the smell of garlic and the glow of the microwave clock. No headlines. No applause. Just life. Quiet, beautiful, and hard-won. A few weeks later, Jake was invited to speak at a major tech summit. The other speakers were CEOs of billion-dollar companies, most of whom had taken venture capital and scaled aggressively. Jake's talk was different. He didn't use slides. He told a story. About a message. $1. A dying father. A love tested and endured. He ended with a photo, not of the product, but of Tobias, smiling with his customized device in hand. The audience rose to their feet. Not because the product was revolutionary, but because the path was. Jake left the stage to a standing ovation, not as a founder, but as a reminder that it's okay to begin from a place of brokenness. That sometimes, the smallest choices, asking for help, sending a message, saying yes to one more day, can change everything. Back at his desk, weeks later, he printed Tobias's email and framed it. He placed it above his desk, right next to the crumpled dollar. 2 reminders, one of where he began. The other of why he kept going. The call came on a gray Wednesday morning, one of those days when everything felt just a little heavier than usual. Jake was reviewing product roadmap updates when his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost let it go to voicemail, but something made him answer. The voice on the other end stopped him cold. "Jake. It's me. Travis." For a second, he couldn't place the name. Then it hit. Travis Miller. His childhood best friend. The same Travis who had practically lived at his house through middle school, who taught him how to skateboard, who vanished after high school when life took a nosedive for both of them. The last time Jake had seen Travis, they were 19. Drunk. Angry. Full of unspoken grief. It had ended in a fight on someone's lawn, fists thrown more out of heartbreak than hate. Now here he was, over a decade later, calling out of nowhere. "I saw your story," Travis said. "I wasn't gonna reach out, but my mom passed a few months ago. And, I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to put things back together." Jake didn't know what to say. He had moved on from a lot of things, poverty, trauma, broken relationships, but the wounds with Travis were unique. They weren't just about betrayal or abandonment. They were about a shared boyhood that had been cut off too soon, left to fester into silence. "Do you want to meet up?" Jake heard himself ask. The question felt like it came from someone else. "Yeah," Travis said. "If you're okay with that." They met the following week at a small diner in Sacramento, halfway between both their cities. Jake got there early. His nerves made him question whether he'd made a mistake, whether this would open old scars better left closed. But when Travis walked in, older, more tired around the eyes but unmistakably him, Jake felt a strange calm wash over him. They sat down. Ordered coffee. And for a while, said nothing. Then Travis chuckled. "You're famous now." Jake smiled. "Only to people who think asking Elon Musk for $1 is a good idea." Travis laughed hard at that, like they were still teenagers cracking jokes behind the 7-Eleven. It broke the tension. They talked for hours. Travis had struggled, addiction, recovery, odd jobs, lost years, but he was clean now, rebuilding. He had a daughter. He showed Jake pictures. A sweet-faced 6-year-old with curly hair and bright eyes. "She doesn't know anything about my past," Travis said. "I'm trying to be better for her." Jake shared his journey in pieces. Not just the company or the device, but the fear, the failure, the nights he thought he couldn't keep going. The truth made it easier. At one point, Travis said quietly, "I'm sorry for disappearing. I just didn't know how to be there for you. After your dad, and everything with Emily. I was a coward." Jake nodded. "We both were. But we were also just kids." There was silence. And then, something Jake hadn't expected, peace. Not the fireworks of a dramatic reconciliation. Just a soft easing of something that had been clenched for years. Before they parted, Travis asked for one thing. "Could I volunteer? At your company or foundation or whatever it is now. I don't want money. I just want to be around something that matters." Jake looked at him and said, without hesitation, "Yeah. I'd like that." In the weeks that followed, Travis started showing up. Quiet at first, cleaning workstations, helping with deliveries. He didn't ask for attention or credit. Just worked. Showed up early, stayed late. The team took to him. He was funny, self-deprecating, and earnest in a way few people were anymore. Jake watched this unfold with cautious joy. Life, he realized, had a way of circling back, bringing unfinished chapters to a close, not always with a bang, but with a quiet turning of the page. Around the same time, Jake received another unexpected letter. This one from the local community center where he'd once volunteered during college. They were struggling, losing funding, barely able to stay open. The director asked if there was anything he could do. He didn't hesitate. The company created a community grants initiative, with the center as its first recipient. But Jake went a step further. He visited in person. Walked the halls. Sat in on tutoring sessions and art classes. And he remembered. He remembered the nights he stayed late cleaning the gym, the kids who looked up to him even when he had no clue what he was doing, the sandwiches passed around like currency among those who had little else. That night, he stood in front of the board of directors and said, "You saved me once. Now it's my turn." They secured long-term funding, built a new tech lab, and created a mentorship pipeline that connected teens with professionals in healthcare and engineering. One of the first students to join the program. A girl named Nia who reminded Jake so much of himself at 15, quiet, intense, brilliant, and just waiting for someone to believe in her. He took her under his wing. Not because he had to. But because he understood, down to his bones, what it meant to be seen by someone who expects you to rise. At night, when the world quieted down, Jake would sit with Emily on the porch of their modest house just outside the city. The stars were always a little dim through the haze of light pollution, but they still searched for constellations. One night, she asked him, "Do you feel like you've made it?" He thought for a long moment. "No," he said. "But I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She smiled. "That's better than making it." He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Yeah. It really is. The chapter ended with Jake writing another note, not for the public, not for a keynote speech. Just a message to himself. He titled it, "What We Owe Each Other." In it, he wrote, "We owe each other grace, space to grow, and the courage to reach back for those still climbing. We owe the next kid what we never had. We owe the world our truth, even when it shakes." He signed it with one word, forward. The morning began like any other, coffee with Emily, a quick jog through the neighborhood, a glance at the steadily growing dashboard of new users. But before Jake could make it out the door, his phone buzzed with a message from Marcus: "We have a problem. Call me now." Marcus wasn't a man of drama, so when Jake read the text, his gut tightened immediately. Within minutes, Jake was in the conference room, the door closed, the blinds drawn. Marcus was already on a video call with legal counsel, PR advisors, and the lead engineer, Linda. The mood was grim. "What's going on?" Jake asked, sitting down fast. "A journalist is running a piece," Marcus said, his tone clipped. "A whistleblower from a former partner claims we rushed product testing and falsified results to speed up the launch." "That's not true," Jake said instantly, looking around at the faces. "We had delays for a reason. We slowed down, not sped up." "We know," Marcus said. "But the whistleblower has internal emails, taken out of context, and he's presenting them as evidence that we ignored red flags." Jake blinked. "Who is it?" "Caleb Freeman," Linda said, jaw tight. "He was part of the third-party testing group. We cut ties because of conflicts of interest, remember?" Jake remembered all too well. Caleb had been aggressive about pushing a faster timeline. When Jake resisted, Caleb's firm lost the contract. It was a messy separation, but Jake had moved on, thinking the chapter was closed. Apparently not. The article was set to go live in less than 24 hours. Jake felt his pulse spike. If the story broke without their side being heard, the damage could be catastrophic: public trust, investor confidence, even FDA scrutiny. "So what do we do?" Jake asked, scanning the faces. PR recommended a holding statement, brief, professional, vague. Legal advised silence until the publication actually dropped. But Jake felt the old instincts kick in. Hiding didn't sit right. "We'll prepare the data logs, email threads, testing results," he said. "We show everything. If we've done nothing wrong, we have nothing to fear." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "You want to go transparent?" "I want to go truthful. That's what got us here." Over the next 12 hours, the team worked non-stop. Every step of the testing process was redocumented. Every approval checkpoint, every meeting transcript, every flagged issue and how it was resolved. Jake personally combed through the communication between his team and Caleb's, building a narrative that was meticulous and unshakable. Emily brought him dinner at the office that night, quietly setting it beside his laptop without interrupting. "I know this feels like everything's coming apart," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder, "but you've been through worse. You didn't come this far to be undone by lies." Jake looked up at her, exhausted but focused. "I just hate that it always comes back to this, someone thinking they can twist the truth and destroy what you built." "Then don't let them," she said. "Tell your truth louder." The next morning, as the article dropped, Jake was ready. The story was damning. It accused the company of ethical negligence, alleged a culture of results over rigor, and quoted Caleb extensively. It made headlines within hours. But Jake's response came just as fast. He released a statement, not through legal channels or PR firms, but via video. Raw, unscripted, honest. "My name is Jake," he began, sitting in a plain office, no filters, no cuts. 3 years ago, I had nothing. I reached out to Elon Musk with a message and an idea. That idea became a mission, one that has helped thousands. Today, someone has made claims that challenge that mission. So here's the truth. He laid out the facts, calmly, clearly, with documented evidence. He acknowledged the partnership with Caleb, the disagreement on testing pace, and the decision to prioritize safety over speed. He didn't attack. He didn't flinch. He just told the story. By the end of the 5-minute video, the tide had started to turn. Viewers flooded the comments section with support. Industry insiders weighed in, defending the company's record. A former FDA consultant even tweeted, "This is how transparency should look." Over the next 48 hours, the story became less about the scandal and more about how Jake handled it. And it wasn't just the media watching. Tobias called, voice shaking. "Man, I thought they were coming for you. But you didn't hide. You stood there. You showed up." Jake felt a lump in his throat. It's not just my name on the line anymore. It's every person we've helped. Every user who trusts this thing to protect their life. That's who I answer to. Internally, morale soared. The team rallied, more unified than ever. They knew what they stood for. And they saw their leader live it. A week later, Jake received a message from someone unexpected, Elon Musk. Short. To the point. Saw the video. Impressive. Integrity scales. Jake stared at the message for a long time. He didn't respond right away. He didn't need to. The full circle wasn't about recognition. It was about standing your ground when the wind howled hardest. That night, Jake wrote another note to himself. Titled, "When They Come For You," it read, "They will twist. They will shout. But the truth doesn't shake if you built it on solid ground. Don't run. Don't lash. Stand. Speak. Let the record show not just what you built, but how you built it." He closed his laptop and looked around the now quiet office. The war had passed. The mission remained. And the truth, unshaken, stood tall. After the storm passed, something strange happened. The office, once buzzing with urgency and reaction, fell into a quiet hum. It wasn't burnout. It was something softer, deeper, a kind of collective exhale. For months, they had pushed hard against gravity, against doubt, against fire. Now, with the threat receding and the company's integrity intact, a silence lingered. Jake noticed it most in the mornings. Where once his days began with 10 new problems and 3 urgent emails before sunrise, now there was stillness. Not emptiness, but calm. Emily noticed it too. "You're not flinching at your phone anymore," she said one morning over coffee. "Is that good?" Jake asked, only half joking. She smiled. "It's necessary." Jake still worked hard, but the work had changed. It was no longer about survival or proof. It was about legacy. About building something that would last beyond him. That shift required new thinking. He began spending more time mentoring his senior team, stepping back from daily fire drills and focusing on the future. He held long one-on-ones with department heads, asking hard questions. What will this look like in 5 years? 10. When I'm not in the room? Some of them admitted they hadn't thought that far. Others said they were relieved to finally be asked. Together, they began planning not just for scale, but for sustainability. That meant building systems that didn't rely on Jake as the center of gravity. It meant training future leaders, redesigning workflows, and saying no to flashy opportunities that didn't align with their mission. It also meant confronting a hard truth: Jake couldn't do everything. He had carried the company on his back for so long that stepping aside, even a little, felt like betrayal. But he knew better now. Leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice or the last one standing. It was about creating space for others to rise. Around this time, Emily received some difficult news. Her latest test results showed signs of progression. Not catastrophic. Not immediate. but enough to shift the ground beneath them again. "So, what does this mean?" Jake asked quietly as they sat together in the hospital parking lot. Emily looked out the window. "It means we have to hold both things, hope and truth." He reached for her hand. "We've done that before." "Yeah," she whispered. "We'll do it again." Treatment resumed. More aggressive this time. And with it came the side effects, nausea, fatigue, moments where she drifted away behind her eyes. But she didn't give up. Neither did he. They adjusted. Slowed down. Made more time for porch talks and shared silences. Jake started blocking off entire Fridays for her, no meetings, no emails, just presence. Sometimes they watched old movies. Sometimes they drove with no destination. Sometimes they sat by the river, saying nothing, holding hands like teenagers in love. One of those Fridays, Emily turned to him and said, "If anything happens, I want you to keep going." "Don't," Jake said, voice cracking. "Not now." "I need to say it," she replied gently. "Because I know you. You'll want to crawl into a hole and never come out. But I need you to keep building. For you. For us. For every person who ever felt like the world forgot them." Jake didn't answer. He couldn't. But he nodded. Because he knew she was right. Around this time, an invitation arrived. The White House. A tech innovation summit. Jake was asked to speak about equitable access to healthcare. He hesitated at first. It felt distant. Political. But Emily said, "Go. Show them what it looks like to build with heart." So he went. Standing in that historic room, flanked by world leaders and CEOs, Jake told the same story he always did, not about success, but about failure. About hunger and grief and one absurd message that changed his life. "I wasn't a genius," he told them. "I was a guy who was out of options. I asked for $1. And I got more than money, I got belief. That's what people need. Not just products. Not just policy. Belief." The speech went viral. Again. But Jake didn't return home intoxicated by the attention. He returned to a quiet dinner table, to Emily's tired smile, to a team that had questions about software integration and user testing in low-bandwidth regions. And that grounded him. A few days later, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a framed letter. Typed. Simple. It read, "Jake, you asked for $1. What you really wanted was a reason to keep going. You found one. Now you're giving others the same. Keep building." Jake didn't need to ask who sent it. He hung it beside the first dollar bill Emily gave him, above his desk, where every visitor could see. Legacy, he realized, isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build into others. As the year came to a close, the company launched a new initiative, partnerships with community colleges to offer certification programs in digital health support. Many of the students were first-generation, low-income, former dropouts. Jake visited the first class in person. He looked out at the rows of students, wide-eyed and unsure, and he saw versions of himself everywhere. "You're not lucky to be here," he told them. "You earned this. And you're not here to get out, you're here to give back. To rise and reach." They applauded. Some cried. And Jake, afterward, sat alone in his car, overwhelmed by a quiet, enormous gratitude. He had asked for $1. He had gotten a movement. But more than that, he had become the kind of person who could give back what he had once begged for. That night, he lay in bed beside Emily, her breathing soft and steady. He whispered, "We're still standing." She stirred. Smiled. Always. It was raining the day Jake gave his last keynote. Not a drizzle, but a full downpour, the kind that soaked your socks and muffled traffic with a steady roar. Inside the auditorium, the lights were low, the seats full, and the air charged with expectation. People had come from all over, startups, nonprofits, healthcare providers, even high school students. Jake stood backstage, holding a worn note card in one hand, the other in his pocket. On the card were 6 words: begin with why. End with them. He'd written it in a hotel room 3 years ago, right before his first public talk. He'd kept it ever since. A reminder. Not of who he was, but of who he wanted to be. When the lights hit and the announcer called his name, Jake stepped out into the storm of applause, not as a CEO or a disruptor, but as a man who had survived himself. He didn't start with stats. He didn't talk about valuation, market share, or the next big launch. Instead, he asked a question. What would you build if you had nothing left to lose? The audience leaned in. I asked Elon Musk for $1, he continued. Not because I thought he'd answer, but because I had nothing else. I wasn't chasing money. I was chasing permission, to try, to matter, to begin again. He told them about the couch surfing, the failed prototypes, the days Emily couldn't stand. About Tobias, about Travis, about the community center that gave him a reason to believe in people again. People think success is about getting there first, he said. It's not. It's about getting back up after life kicks you down. Again and again. Then he paused. Looked out across the packed room. We didn't just build a device. We built belief. That's what lasts. That's what scales. He finished without fanfare. No pitch. No CTA. Just truth. And the audience rose, not because they were dazzled, but because they were moved. Afterward, Jake didn't linger. He walked into the rain, coat unzipped, not bothering with an umbrella. There was something cleansing about it. Something whole. At home, Emily was waiting. Her treatments had stabilized things, for now. They no longer spoke in terms of years or even months. They measured life in moments. In ordinary Tuesdays, in blueberry pancakes, in the smell of fresh sheets. She sat at the kitchen table, her laptop open, glasses perched on her nose. How'd it go? She asked. You were probably better than Obama, she teased. Jake grinned. He has better writers. She raised her eyebrows. You don't use writers. Exactly, Jake said. They laughed. And then they sat, sharing soup, reading emails, letting the world be as it was, unpredictable, imperfect, deeply beautiful. That weekend, they drove out to the coast. No schedule. No calls. Just miles of road winding along cliffs and the crashing Pacific. At one overlook, Jake pulled over. They stood at the edge, wind whipping their jackets. Remember when we thought all this was impossible? Emily said. Every day, Jake replied. But it wasn't, she said. You made it real. He looked at her, then out at the ocean. We did. That night, at a tiny rental house with a fireplace and broken Wi-Fi, Jake opened a journal he hadn't touched in months. He wrote slowly, deliberately, there is no finish line. There is only the choice to keep going. Every day. Through fear. Through grief. Through uncertainty. And when you can't walk, you crawl. And when you can't crawl, you lean on someone until you can. He closed the journal, kissed Emily goodnight, and dreamed of nothing. Just peace. In the months that followed, Jake transitioned to chairman of the board. He hired a new CEO, someone young, sharp, grounded in mission. The company continued to grow, not because Jake was at the center, but because he built a center that didn't rely on him. That, he decided, was the real victory. Meanwhile, he turned his attention to mentoring. Not on panels or podcasts, but in quiet coffees with founders who had more passion than funding, more pain than press. He listened. He asked hard questions. He told them the same thing every time: your story is your strength. Don't edit the pain out. Build from it. He and Emily also started a foundation, the $1 Project, focused on funding first-time creators from underrepresented backgrounds. Not with millions. With $1 investments and a year of support. The idea was simple: you don't need everything. You just need enough to believe it's worth trying. Some laughed at the concept. Others called it naive. But the first 10 recipients launched projects that touched over 300,000 lives. And counting. One day, Jake received a letter from a boy in Detroit. 12 years old. Single mom. Built a weather app to help kids in his neighborhood dress for school better. Your $1 made me feel like $1 million, he wrote. Jake cried reading it. Not because of the praise. But because he saw himself in every line. Years passed. Jake and Emily aged. Her health waxed and waned. Some days were harder than others. But they never stopped dancing in the kitchen. They never stopped driving with no destination. And they never stopped holding hands like the world might end tomorrow. When Emily passed, it was quiet. Peaceful. She held his hand until the last breath. Jake didn't give a eulogy. He played her favorite song and let the music do the talking. Afterward, he disappeared for a while. No social posts. No meetings. Just long walks, old books, and the ache of a love that refused to fade. But slowly, he returned. Because she would have wanted him to. He spoke again. Wrote again. Laughed again. And one evening, years later, he stood in front of a group of students and told the story from the beginning. I asked Elon Musk for $1, he said. But what I really asked for was permission. To matter. To begin again. The students were silent, eyes wide. And what I got was everything. He ended with a final message: so here's your permission. Right now. To begin. With nothing. With fear. With doubt. Start anyway. Ask anyway. Because the world doesn't need your perfection. It needs your truth. They stood and clapped. But Jake didn't need applause. He already had what mattered. That night, he walked home beneath a star-filled sky. He looked up, smiled, and whispered into the quiet, "Thank you." And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the world, a ripple kept moving, through devices, through letters, through lives. All from one simple, absurd, desperate question: what if I asked Elon Musk for $1? Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?